From the studio of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta, I'm Dr. William Lester. Welcome to the Dogman Files, Part 4. My encounter with the creature that everyone today calls Dogman took place in the summer of 1972 when I was 8 years old. We were traveling. My mother, her boyfriend Rick, and I were returning from a trip, driving from Dallas to San Antonio. For at least a portion of the trip, I dozed quietly on the back seat. Now you've got to remember that on a drive like that, which is basically through the heart of Texas, there are countless back roads, side roads, even farm roads, and some not paved. And in those days, long before GPS, it was not uncommon for some of those isolated roads to not even be shown on a map. It was on one of those lonely dark roads that we were to encounter what I would call a monster from my darkest nightmare. It's so ironic too, because I remember the fun and enjoyment of that day. The smell of boiled peanuts, cigarettes and coffee, and smoke from barbecue pits and open kitchen windows and roadside tents, all juxtaposed to the horror that was to come. It all began with me being shaken out of my backseat nap by two things: the swerving of our car and my mother's blood-curdling scream. Off to the left of the road, about 30 feet in front of us, was what looked like the biggest dog or wolf you could imagine. To me, it looked like the wolves that I would see on those National Geographic shows. It was jet black and absolutely massive. To add to the shock of the event, the wolf was low to the ground eating a dead cow. Blood was splashed everywhere, on the road, the fence posts, and the grass. The size of the wolf threw us at first. I remember my mother saying later that she initially thought it was feeding on a dead calf, and that's what made it look bigger. But this goddamn thing was chewing, ripping, and gnawing on a full-size adult cow. Think about that for a second. This damn wolf creature was so massive that we mistook a fully grown cow for a calf. And don't think for 2 seconds that because we were on a back road at night that we were confused about what we were looking at. We were sitting inside of an El Dorado, and back then El Dorados were big, long, huge cruise ship-like cars. Well, we were about 30 feet away and had full headlights dead on the entire situation. What I'm describing to you now is exactly what we saw. Now, as if this whole thing wasn't horrifying enough, what happened next turned my entire concept of reality completely upside down. The wolf thing turned and looked directly at us, and then stood up on 2 legs and took 3 or 4 steps toward the car. It snarled and growled and had the look on its face like it wanted to rip all of our guts out. That was it. Rick put the damn freight train of a car in reverse, straightened out, and tore down the road like a crazy man. All the way back to San Antonio, they talked in hushed tones and practically ignored my frantic interjections about what we'd seen. But I was a child, and eventually the sum total of the day and the traumatic events of that night overwhelmed me, and I fell back asleep. I don't remember the incident being talked about much over the years. I think in some strange way we all subconsciously, or shit, maybe even consciously, wanted to live life as if the event never happened. But it did happen, and it was the most horrifying experience of my life. All those years ago, I had no idea that what started out as a fun family trip would have a final destination of terror. My encounter with a Dogman took place 3 years ago. It's something that I can never forget. Since that time, I've done a lot of reading about Dogman and heard many of the stories about other people's sightings and encounters. There's a lot being written and talked about these creatures on the internet. A lot of it's nonsense and bullshit conjured up by 30-year-old fat guys living in their mother's basements. Now, to the people who ask me about my experience because they want to go out and hunt or look for these creatures, I say this. People are free to do whatever they want, but based on my encounter, I think anybody going out to find these creatures or see these creatures or whatever the hell they want to do is just a damn fool. My encounter took place on the first day of summer break from my job as a college professor. After 2 long semesters of U.S. history and introduction to ancient civilizations, I was damn sure looking forward to 12 weeks of fun, relaxation, and enjoyment. I could catch up on my reading, blur my eyes with endless movies and baseball games, and do some fishing and maybe mix in a road trip or two. So like I said, on that first day of vacation, I got a couple of rods and reels together, tackle box, packed an overnight bag, including half a box of Cohibas and a bottle of Hennessy, loaded up my cooler with some chicken wings, deviled eggs, sandwiches, and Coca-Colas. I got the car loaded up, lit a cigar, cranked up the music, and hit the highway. An hour and a half later, I was in the North Georgia mountains. I checked into the hotel, got into my room, and enjoyed a club sandwich. Eagle Lake was only a 10-minute drive from the hotel, so I planned to get out there, do a few hours worth of fishing, sip some Hennessy, and listen to some baseball on the radio. That's right. I have an old school AM/FM radio so I can listen to music or sports without relying on a damn internet connection. So there I was, sitting in my folding chair, making my first casts into the lake. I had 2 rods, one with a bobber set at about 3.5–4 feet, and another just with a hook and sinker to go right to the bottom. So whether it was brim, crappie, perch, or catfish, I had the lake covered from top to bottom. I clicked on the radio and pulled up a jazz station, which I was excited to lock in on up in the mountains. I dipped my tumbler into the cooler to scoop up some ice and added the Hennessy. Now we're getting there. I toasted the end of a Cohiba, rotated and took a few puffs until it was perfectly lit. Now we're all the way there. And of course, that's when things went from picture perfect to absolute shit blizzard. From out of nowhere, and I mean out of nowhere, a big rock came flying through the air and hit the lake about 10 feet from the shoreline where I was sitting. Now, I said the rock was big, but I'm not trying to say that it was a boulder or anything. But this thing was easily bigger than a brick and plunked down in the water with considerable splash and spray. I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? Is someone back in the bushes messing with me? And how far can somebody throw a rock that size anyway? The brush was easily 50 feet away, if not more. While I was trying to figure all of this out, I heard a very low growl coming from the thicket, the same direction that the rock had come from. It was incredibly low, and the rumble of it started to concern me. What the hell is this? Almost as if on cue, the bushes started to shake and shudder as I saw what I can only describe as a giant wolf protrude its head out of the bushes. Then, as if it could possibly get crazier, this thing reared up and stood on 2 legs. Also at that moment, this thing let out a screaming roar that hit me like a shockwave. Man, I can tell you, I've never been so goddamn scared in all my life. I was literally shaking with terror. This thing had a look on its face like it wanted to rip my heart right out of my chest. Then, to my surprise, this thing fell back down on 4 legs and backed away into the brush and disappeared. I got everything, and I mean everything, back into the trunk of my car in less than 2 minutes and tore ass out of there like a crazy man. I hit the highway, got back to the hotel, got the rest of my belongings, checked out, and headed back down the highway to the city. How did I spend the rest of my summer vacation? Going to the movies and exploring some cool, interesting places in Midtown, art galleries, cafes, and little chic out-of-the-way places. I bought baseball tickets and sat there for all 9 innings. I was fairly sure that way, I'd never have to deal with a damn Dogman ever again. I've been wanting to tell this story ever since the events surrounding what I'm about to disclose took place in October of 2015. I need to say at the outset that I will not be using my real name, nor the names of any of the men I worked with. In addition, I've changed the names of specific locations and other important details that, if widely known, would jeopardize the well-being of a lot of people. For the purposes of what I'm about to tell you, call me Connor. I'm enlisted in the United States Army. My rank cannot be disclosed. In the summer of 2015, I became attached to a highly specialized 12-man unit that was referred to as Special Operations and Containment Team, or SOCOT. We called ourselves Apache Squad because we were fast, highly mobile, and quite frankly, every man in that squad was more than capable in the right set of circumstances of being a cool, efficient killer. Now, one thing that you have to understand, Apache Squad specialized in going into areas that were known to have, how should I put it, a concentration of high strangeness, particularly when it involves strange or unusual creatures. You see, regardless of what a lot of people might think, a lot of these things are 100% real. I don't mean pixies and elves either. I mean straight up motherfucking monsters. The kind that can terrorize and even kill people. That's right. It's been happening for a long time, and when it does happen, or even when there's the threat of it happening, that's when we went to work. Now, in this situation, we learned during our team briefing that our mission target was in the southeastern region of the U.S., the Deep South. That's as specific as I'm going to get on that. But it was the specific subject of the briefing that got all the eyebrows on our squad raised. We were going after a group of gray 220s. Now, for everybody who's listening to this, gray 220s is a code word for what everybody nowadays calls Dogman. That's right. These incredibly large, fast, vicious, upright walking canine monsters that you probably heard a lot of bullshit about on the internet. Let me tell you something about these things. Regardless of the mindless dumb fucks that you hear talking about these creatures on social media, they're not demons, they have nothing to do with skinwalkers, and for God's sakes, they have nothing to do with werewolves. Now, those are all real things to be sure, and I'll probably have more to say about all that later, but for now, I'll keep it to the issue at hand. You see, we know that these damn things are extraterrestrial. That's right. They're fucking alien interlopers who don't come in and out of a vortex. They got here on nuts and bolts interstellar vehicles starting about 2700 BC. That's right. These sons of bitches have been on this planet for more than 4,700 years. And for that whole time, they've been up to no good. So in our mission briefing, we were told about a particular area where the gray 220s were known to be habituating. And additionally, that there had been a number of sightings and also a number of unexplained disappearances. Then came the most disturbing part. There had been 2 officially unexplained mutilation murders where the victims were partially consumed. That was what raised the threat level to the point that warranted our intervention. We were choppered in and dropped into the target zone just before dusk, which we loved. We were going in with cold, hard steel at the brink of twilight. We hit the ground running, and right away our tech engineer guy, who of course we had nicknamed Scotty, got a perimeter monitoring network set up in almost no time. It didn't take long either before we started getting hits on the thermal. Now, I don't mean thermal hits from deer or raccoons or bears. I mean clear, unmistakable imaging that ruled all that other stuff out. It was almost like these damn things had been waiting on us. But if they wanted to get some shit going, we were going to give them all they wanted. Then the howling started. It came from every direction, and man, these howls were loud and they went through you like a percussive tidal wave. We all knew that this was a signal that they were coming in. The first one came in from the left, and Briggs, who was positioned at the extreme left of the perimeter, opened up with an M249. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how these things are almost impervious to gunfire, and to an extent it's true when it comes to more conventional weapons. What I can tell you, though, is that our ammunition is of a much higher level manufacturer, and Briggs' fire ripped that son of a bitch's chest wide open, and it hit the ground in mid-stride. Then Scotty came over the radio. All points, here they come. Then it was on. They came in from every direction on all fours. Every point of the perimeter was manned. From what we could determine, there were 8 of them. As they neared our position, they began to rear up and stand on 2 legs. And I gave the order to engage. Man, I'm telling you, these damn things moved like lightning, and they were huge. There wasn't one that was less than 7 feet tall. They roared, growled, and screamed. They threw big rocks and broken tree branches at us. In return, we introduced them to the M500, which is a 12-gauge, 5-round shotgun. I saw 2 go down with holes in them the size of a basketball. The main thing was not to let these motherfuckers get close. They were bigger, stronger, and faster than us, and there was no such thing as a winnable hand-to-hand situation. So we kept the fire hot on them until we had no more mobile target heat signatures. The perimeter went quiet. Right on cue, we heard the choppers coming in. The retrieval team would be in to do a full sweep and removal. 8 less of these monsters in the world. The debriefing was pretty much ho-hum and by the book, and we were all beneficiaries of a 6-week leave and the nondescript deposit of $100,000 in our bank accounts, which of course had nothing to do with regular Army pay. I took a vacation to Key West to do some saltwater fishing. Later on, we got together for a few barbecues, cigars, and scotch. We would sit around laughing, talking, and placing bets on what the next call would be. But whatever it was, Apache Squad would be ready, and no matter what, we will succeed because of our highest ideals, honor, sacrifice, and dedication to the time-tested warrior's rules of engagement. This isn't the first time I've shared my experiences. My name is Connor. If you listen to Blackwater Media, you might remember me talking about my military service in relation to the Dogman phenomena. To recap, since 2015, I've been attached to a highly specialized 12-man unit that's referred to as Special Operations and Containment Team, or SOCOT. Because of the nature of our operations, largely predicated on speed, stealth, and mobility, we call ourselves Apache Squad. As to our primary operational objective, it's the detection and elimination of cryptid threats to life and property. In fact, it's possible that someone listening to the sound of my voice right now is alive and well because of Apache Squad. You just never knew it. That's pretty much what happened to 3 young men who decided to go hiking and camping in a section of forest land that was not authorized for recreational use. According to the USDA Forest Service, this has been an ongoing problem in a number of places across the United States, including the lower and deep south, where we knew there was an upswing in Grade 220 sightings. Again, for those of you who may not have heard my earlier recounting of the events in October of 2015, Gray 220 is our code word for dogmen. So in April of 2018, we learned during a team briefing that there was Gray 220 activity in an area about 200 miles from the October 2015 operation. Now, by activity, I don't just mean a sighting or two. It was pervasive activity. Mutilated and partially eaten farm animals, including 3 cows, pet dogs and cats gone missing, enraged howling from the deepest parts of the forests. Worst of all, there had been one of those, quote, person killed by a pack of wild dogs stories in that area. A person had been savagely killed, but there was no pack of wild dogs involved. It was already early spring, and as we moved on through the spring and into the summer, there would be more and more people out in that area, in both sanctioned and non-sanctioned areas to hunt, camp, hike, fish, and God knows what else. The call was left up to us, and we chose to go in. It was unanimous. Now I have to say this again, and I'm probably going to have to keep on saying it because of the never-ending bullshit about these creatures that seems to be all over social media. These creatures are not phantoms or any kind of spirit. They don't pop in and out of portals, and they cannot read your mind. They are of non-terrestrial origin, and they've been here for a very, very long time. And trust me when I tell you, they are not our friends. The prevailing wisdom among those in the know is that they originally hailed from Sirius, a planet that the West African Dogman called Nylon Tolo. It orbits a heretofore unknown star called Sirius C. It's a lot to take in, I know. But when dealing with these things, every little bit of information can mean the difference between life and death. Anyway, we flew into a local airbase and headed out to the target area in a pair of Humvees. When we arrived, we broke out the gear and went a quarter mile into the interior on foot to set up a perimeter. As usual, Scotty got the radio and the thermal system going. 3 teams with 3 men each went out on recon. 3 men remained at the perimeter. You see, we knew these creatures, their habits, their tendencies, which of course included compensating for their tactical intelligence. We also understood that from the moment we hit the ground, we were being watched. Gamma Team was to the west, and to the west of them was a long 2.5 mile fence line which separated public and private land, with us on the private side. Alpha Team was to the north, and Beta Team to the east. The first thermal hits came from the west, 5 signatures approaching the fence line. The radio signal went out, and we moved to back up Gamma. I was leading Alpha, and as we double timed it west, I could hear Scotty on the radio saying, "Those motherfuckers are up on the fence. 2 of them are already over." We could hear the howls and growling growing in intensity. And then the shit started flying. I don't think many people realize that these creatures have hands like we do, and they are incredibly strong. They can pick up a 100-pound rock and throw it like a missile 20 or 30 yards, or rip a rotting tree stump out of the ground and throw it the same way. And we opened up on it. And we could hear the sounds of their angry growls and roars. But we could also detect in those sounds a degree of fear and trepidation. I could hear M500s booming in the melee, and then a loud grunt of pain. Sanderson had taken a rock to the shoulder. Comstock got him up on his feet and told him to get back to the perimeter. He started moving back reluctantly. Before doing so, fired off several more rounds, taking down the creature that he believed sent that rock hurtling at him. The general action continued on, until the message was radioed in that there were no more active thermal signals. 5 targets down. Another successful mission. But it came with a cost. A squad member with a broken shoulder. We all knew, however, and I mean including Sanderson, that it could have been worse. A hell of a lot worse. We knew that in short order the retrieval team would come in and do their thing, and the world would be a better place for it. Once we were back at the Humvees, Everyone was anxious to get Sanderson to Air Base Infirmary to get his injuries attended to. But just then, a pickup truck came rolling down the road in our direction. We flagged it down and saw that there were 3 young men in it with a cab full of camping gear. Now keep in mind, we almost never deal with civilians, but this was a totally unavoidable situation. When we asked where they were headed, the driver hesitated momentarily and then said they were looking to set up camp in the area. So of course I let him know that the Forest Service had prohibited camping in the area and suggested that they turn around and head to one of the authorized camping zones. I really did want to keep the whole thing friendly and said to him, "Hey man, no need to risk getting fined or getting your truck towed. If you want, you can even follow us back up the road to one of the camping areas." Then all 3 of them looked at each other, and the driver said that they would just as soon take their chances and that we had no authority to tell them where they could or could not camp. I thought to myself, oh shit, I'm going to have to get real with these assholes. So I looked him dead in the eye. "Sir, I have the authority to detain you until Forestry Service arrives, at which time you would be held and possibly arrested. And I'll tell you something else. If you'd been here an hour earlier, all 3 of you dumbasses would probably be dead. So if you got 3 brain cells between you, turn this goddamn truck around and go back wherever the fuck it is you came from." Apparently, the message got through. They backed up the truck, turned it around, and drove back down the road and out of sight. So, we finished loading the Humvees and headed back to base for debriefing. By the way, Sanderson recovered from his shoulder injury, and bulldog that he is back good as new. A lot of people might wonder if the work of Apache Squad only involves dealing with dogmen. Well, the answer is no. Like I've said before, there are other things out there. Terrible, dangerous creatures. Trust me, I know. Hell, I might even tell you about them someday.
Non-stop to New Orleans? Call Delta first, the airline that leads with non-stops to the Mardi Gras city. Delta has the most jets as well as the most non-stops to New Orleans. 8 services a day, 3 non-stops. And Delta's non-stop breakfast flight that puts you there before 10 is the first arrival of the morning. Another Delta non-stop leaves for New Orleans in the mid-afternoon, another in the early evening with a delicious dinner en route. If you're going to Birmingham, your biggest choice again is on Delta, and the only daytime nonstop is Delta's luncheon flight. So for New Orleans, Birmingham, or Shreveport, remember the leader. Call Delta or your travel agent.
Delta is ready when you are.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. It's taken me a few years to talk about this. In fact, there was a time when I considered never, ever telling another soul about this. But there were other people involved, other players in the game, so to speak. So I decided to share this experience with Dr. Lester and Blackwater Media, and therefore with the general public. 20 years ago, I was a U.S. Forest Service Ranger working in the southeastern United States in what's called Region 8. You see, national forest lands are divided up administratively into regions, and each region has a special agent in charge. This special agent was my immediate commanding officer. Essentially, as a ranger, my job was to enforce federal laws and regulations that govern national forest lands and resources. In my time with the service, I thought I'd seen it all. Wildfires, timber thefts, amazing archaeological finds, the whole 9 yards. but nothing could have prepared me for what was to come behind a missing persons call that came in just after noon on a Wednesday in late September of that year. A man, Richard Pennings, who I learned later ran a decent-sized contracting firm out of Memphis, hadn't been heard from in 4 or 5 days and had been due back in his office that Monday. He kept a cabin up near Black Rock Springs, so I signed off on the call, got my jacket, into the truck, and I was off. As I drove along, I noticed how amazing the landscape was. Everything was taking on the sights and scents of autumn. It took about 20 minutes to get to the cabin, which I accessed on a 75-yard gravel and dirt driveway. From the moment I stepped out of the truck, I knew that something was wrong. The air seemed heavy and thick with something that I find almost impossible to describe. It was beyond surreal. I started walking the perimeter of the cabin and checked the crawl space. I even backed up and looked at the roof. All of this I did, mind you, with my hand on my weapon the whole time. I attempted to enter the cabin, but the door was locked. Or at least that's what I thought at first. The knob, which was actually like a lever, wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed the door frame. The door had somehow been removed from its frame and then jammed back in place with incredible force. The windows of the cabin were too small for me to get through, so I knew that I was going to have to get that damn door down. I took the gooseneck crowbar from the tool bin in the truck and went to work. I was able to take the crowbar and wedge it into the uneven little gaps of space between the door and the damaged frame. As much power as it must have taken to do what someone had apparently done, I didn't have too much trouble getting the door down. Then the nightmare began. What I saw on the floor of that cabin shocked and disturbed me at every level humanly possible. I was looking at the lower half of a human torso, soaked with blood and gore, also strewn about shredded and torn bits of God knows what everywhere. Then the smell hit me. It was as if I was being bombarded by every level of stench on every level of existence. It was like buckets of excrement and pools of acidic piss and rancid meat stacked and piled to the ceiling. I backed out the door before I lost my mind and my breakfast. Once outside, I turned, still in a state of relative shock, and just happened to look out across the ridgeline and saw something that not only convinced me that the world had been turned inside out, but also scared the living, breathing shit out of me. Walking the ridge were 2 of the biggest goddamn wolves I've ever seen. Except they couldn't have been, since I knew that wolves don't get that big. Suddenly, both of the creatures stopped, turned their heads, and locked eyes with me. And then, to my absolute shock, both stood up on 2 legs. What the fuck am I looking at? Ran through my brain like wildfire. It was a horrifying moment, but also one of mutual recognition. It was like the expression on their faces were saying, "You see us, we see you. We're going this way. Take your ass on in the other direction, and let's leave it at that." Although my weapon was at the ready, something told me that in this situation, that discretion was the better part of valor. My next thought was the realization that these things, these giant wolves that could stand up and walk like men, were responsible for the carnage inside the cabin. I called in on my radio. I knew that within just a matter of minutes there would be additional officers, maybe even someone from the detectives division out here, along of course with the medical examiner. What I did not anticipate, however, was the arrival of a white, unmarked SUV with an unusual license plate carrying the name of no state and only a 4-digit number in black. 2 men got out, wearing white dress shirts and ties. Both men were wearing slacks, one in brown and one in gray. The older man was white, and appeared to be perhaps in his late 50s. The younger man was African American, slightly taller, and was perhaps 35 to 40 years old. They walked up and introduced themselves as being with the Department of the Interior. They asked if I discovered the body, and I told them yes. They wanted to know if I'd looked around the immediate area, and again I told them I had. They looked at each other, and then the younger guy asked me if I'd seen anything unusual in the area. That question was an immediate tip-off. They knew about those wolf creatures. That's why they were there. I sure as hell wasn't going to clue them in as to what I'd actually seen. So I went into bullshit mode. Unusual? Like what? I asked. They looked at each other again. Then again the younger man spoke. Anything out of the ordinary or anything that seems strange or out of place. You mean strange, like a man torn in two and his top half taken? Was my answer. Then the older man said, "Thank you for your time. When it's ready, we'd like to read your report." "You can request it through the office of the special agent for Region 8, I replied to them. They both gave a nod, got back into their truck, and left. A few minutes after they left, Forest Service personnel arrived, as well as the medical examiner. I never uttered one word about the strange wolf creatures that I saw. The official story was that Richard Pennings had been the unfortunate victim of mountain lion, and that the area would be quarantined until the threat to the public could be contained. I have no idea what ended up happening to the two strangers that questioned me. I have no idea whether or not the creatures were seen again in that area. The next week, I put in for a goddamn transfer to the administrative division at the state capitol. Not only was the transfer approved quickly, it came with a promotion. I came to learn that the creatures that I had seen were known as Dogmen. From everything I read, these creatures must be one of the most dangerous land predators in the world. I have no idea how long these things have been around, or where the hell they might come from. I was surprised to read that at least a few researchers suspect these things may be extraterrestrial, but I don't know. What I do know is there have been a lot of unexplained mutilation murders in some of the isolated locales in the U.S. I'm certain now that at least in some of those instances, these creatures were responsible. They're huge, powerful, fast, fierce, and very intelligent. But I'm also certain that no medical examiner out there would fill out and sign a death certificate that read, "Cause of death, Dogman." They'd be better off just chalking the whole thing up to a very, very bad case of cabin fever. I was just out driving one night because I was bored and wanted to get out. First, I want to say that I don't drink at all or do any kinds of drugs. Usually when I'm driving, I see lots of animals: deer, rabbits, raccoons, opossums, skunks, and more. But this particular night, I didn't see any animals out, and this was very unusual. I was about 2.5 miles outside of Cross Plains, Texas, when suddenly there was a large animal in the middle of the road eating a dead raccoon that had been hit by a car. I first saw a sparkle from the animal's eyes as my headlight shined up the road. I always watch for shining eyes because I know many animals are out at night. I slowed down and stopped about 30 feet from the animal, which at first looked like a large, dark gray dog eating on a dead animal. It was standing on all 4 feet and started off to the left side of the road, but only moved a few feet when it turned and went back to its meal. The creature then picked up the raccoon in its mouth and headed off the road to the right. As I watched the dog-like animal walking off the road, the animal then raised up on its hind legs as it walked towards the fence along the road. When it got to the fence, the animal jumped over the fence while still carrying the raccoon. Now, I know most animals and know that a full-size raccoon can easily weigh 30 pounds or more. This animal walked on its hind legs and jumped over a fence that was about 5 feet high and didn't even touch the fence. The animal then crouched behind some weeds and small brush. I had gotten out of my car with a flashlight to see more because I didn't know what I was seeing. I don't know of any animal like that, and I've lived in rural Texas all my life. When I shone my light on the animal, the reflection of light on the animal's eyes was red. They didn't glow red like others described in their accounts. It was like when you take a picture of someone and they have a red glow from the flash. I know most animals' eyes reflect kind of blue or white sparkle when light is shown on them. Anyway, while I was shining the light on the animal, it started a very loud, deep growl, and then a loud hissing noise. At that point, I said, "Fuck it," and got back into my car. I wasn't staying any longer without a gun, and I didn't have a gun with me, so I then drove off. I watched the animal for a period of about 8 to 10 minutes before I left. I know there's people out there who don't believe this story. I've had people call me a liar and even laugh in my face, but I don't care. What I saw was real, and those people can take a slow boat to hell and kiss my ass. I've always known that strange things exist. I didn't want to believe it, but then I saw a creature that nowadays people call the Dogman. I was walking through Meridian State Park hiking around the lake. It was almost dusk, and I knew I wouldn't make it back to my cabin before dark settled over the park. As I got closer to the bee caves, about halfway around the lake, I saw a huge shadow. Thinking it was probably just a large man, I continued walking with my head down, hoping I wouldn't trip over a root or rock. Soon, I noticed a huffing sound behind me. I looked back and saw a great big thing behind me. If it hadn't been standing on 2 legs, I would have thought it was the biggest wolf I'd ever seen. I moved so goddamn fast, I outran my own shadow. I started shouting at the top of my voice. I was almost back to the campsite. I ran into the clearing still yelling. My girlfriend, Jennifer, ran to me, thinking I was hurt. As she held on to me, only one word came from my mouth: wolf. Of course, no one believed me, and of course, by that time, the creature was gone. The next day, Jennifer and I hiked the circumference of the lake together. When we reached the bee caves, I began to feel my chest tighten. A short way past the caves, Jennifer said, "Wait a minute." She pointed at something on the ground. I kneeled down. There on the ground was the largest paw print I'd ever seen. I said to her, "That's no damn dog print. It's not a bear print either. It's time to go home." We left and didn't look back. That was the summer of 1977. And I've never gone back. My uncle had a Dogman encounter in the summer several years back. From the beginning, I believed him because his whole life he's always been a super serious, no bullshit kind of guy. When he told the story, he sounded genuinely upset about it. He's a long-haul truck driver and was stopped on the side of the highway in a heavily wooded area. This was somewhere several miles in the middle of nowhere, but he said it was closest to Reed City, Michigan. I can't recall what he said he was doing, but he had to fix something before he could take off again. Also, he didn't have a trailer on at the time. He'd just gotten done fixing up his stuff and was about to climb into his vehicle when he saw a deer come tearing ass from behind a tree line. He said it was clearly running from something, which he assumed might have been a bear. He was just getting ready to leave when he suddenly saw something looking at him through the passenger side window. He described it as having jet black fur and bright yellow eyes, as well as vicious-looking snarling teeth. It was so close to him that he could see its fur blowing with the slight breeze that was coming through. The window was open, but it didn't seem to notice, as evident when the creature put its hand up to the window as if to press it against the window, but pulled it back in shock when it realized its hand actually entered the vehicle. Now, my uncle typically carries a gun on him, and at this time he had a heavy revolver. I've forgotten the exact name and caliber. He pointed it at the creature and pulled the trigger, effectively shooting it directly in the face. Finally, the truck started moving fast enough for him to be confident that the thing wasn't following him, should it have survived the shot. But he didn't bother waiting around to find out. He said he still gets disturbed when he thinks back to that event. He described it as giving off this aura of pure evil and ill intent, in only a few seconds that he faced it. He has nightmares about this creature to this day, and he refused to tell anyone about it until several years after it happened, for fear of people thinking he'd lost his mind. Another reason I'm able to buy his story is because he's never been interested in the occult, supernatural, paranormal, cryptids, anything. He had no idea what to make of this thing. But when he told me the story, I told him to look into the Dogman. When he looked online, he said the artist's depictions of the Dogman fit perfectly for what he saw that night.
I like the unusual flavor of Thunderbird wine. It's an exceptionally good drink for every occasion. Thunderbird has an unusual flavor all its own. Not quite like anything I've ever tasted. I suggest that you try Thunderbird. It's really delightful.
The following story happened to one of my closest friends. It was told to me the next morning as he sat upset and scared in his kitchen. This affected me deeply, as this friend is one of the most fearless and capable people I've ever met. Just to show you how calm and unexcitable he is, I'll share one brief incident from his past. While sleeping in the back of his pickup truck one night in a very remote part of the southeast Idaho desert, he told me he was startled out of a deep sleep by the uneasy feeling of being watched. Upon opening his eyes, he was surprised to see a gray, hairy, man-like face leaning over the side of the pickup bed watching him sleep. He quickly sat upright, startling the creature, which he watched bound away in the moonlight through the sage brush and lava rock. When he told me this, I asked, "What did you do?" He answered, "I went back to sleep. I was tired." As I said, not very excitable. So when I saw him that morning in his kitchen, scared and shaken, it affected me deeply. Anyway, here's what happened. My friend and I had just moved to Portland, Oregon after college. One day he asked me if he could borrow my .357 Magnum to take on a deer archery hunt he was planning the next weekend. He didn't think he'd need to use it, but was somewhat concerned about the large bear population where he'd be hunting. I loaned it to him, and he arrived at the hunting site deep in the woods at the end of a logging road around twilight. Wanting to start hunting first thing the next morning, he rode his mountain bike into the dark to where he'd hung up his stand to spread some scent and make sure his shooting lanes were still open, etc. As he was crouched down, dribbling doe and heat urine on a bush, he felt the presence of something behind him. He stood and turned, reaching for the only light he'd brought with him, one of those little keyring LED lights that turn on when you squeeze it. He squeezed the light on and saw a pretty large set of eyes about 3 feet off the ground reflect back at him. The LED light was too weak to show anything else, just the reflection of those eyes. He was thinking that it was normal that a bear or deer would mistake him for an animal. After all, he was crouched down and smelled like deer urine. He stood up straight, clapped his hands together and said, "Get out of here," in a firm voice, expecting that the confused animal would bolt away when it realized he was human. But his actions did not bring the expected result. Instead of turning and running away, the eyes slowly rose to over 9 feet tall and took a step towards him. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread and quickly pulled the .357 out of the holster. Holding the revolver in one hand and the squeeze LED light in the other hand, he backed away from the eyes. Every step he took backwards, the eyes matched by advancing towards him, but always staying just out of the ring of light emitted by the keyring. In a short time, he was backed up against a large tree, which he used to protect his back while he watched the eyes observe him from about 10 feet away. The eyes would weave back and forth like a large animal, adjusting his weight from side to side. They would rise and lower slightly like something was studying him from different angles. The impression that he got was that this was some kind of monster wolf. It reminded him, he said, of the creatures in that movie, The Howling. He kept thinking to himself, it's a fucking monster. It's an actual goddamn wolf monster, and it looks like it wants to rip my goddamn head off. The way it moved, the sound of the leaves under its feet as it walked, the impressive amounts of air that were inhaled and exhaled as it breathed, and most of all, the height of the eyes as they towered over him all indicated a creature of massive size. After what seemed like an eternity, he lost sight of the eyes, but he could hear the animal circling his position. Now, more than an hour had passed since the last noise or sighting of eyes. My friend was sitting with his back against a tree and a cocked .357 in his hand, decided it would be safe to leave the area. It was now around 1 o'clock in the morning. He started walking to where he left his mountain bike. To his dismay, he heard the animal paralleling him in the thick brush. The beast followed him to his bike. Not wanting to lose his sense of hearing, his only warning of the animal's position, he chose to push his bike back to the truck instead of riding. It took him over 4 damn hours to push the bike back to his camp. When he thought the animal was too close, judging by the sounds it made in the underbrush, he would stop and wait. Every time he stopped, the animal would inevitably start to circle him again. When it sounded like its circuitous route took it a little farther away from my friend, he would start pushing his bicycle again, only to repeat the same routine every 10 minutes or so throughout the torturous night. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, he reached his vehicle, and in an adrenaline and panic-induced sprint, he threw his bike in the back, started the truck, and was headed down the mountain. It took several miles before the heavy sense of doom started to recede. As the adrenaline wore off, the shake started. He started shaking so bad that it was all he could do to keep his truck on the road until he pulled up to his house and into a kitchen chair. That's where I found him a while later when I went over to his house to feed and water his dog. After he told me what happened to him, I offered to go back with him and retrieve his camping gear and the tree stand. He refused the offer and left his possessions to nature rather than return to the area. Even though he hunts and fishes as avidly as ever, he'll never go back to that spot and avoids the entire region at all costs. And I don't blame him. After all, who wants to come face to face with a bloodthirsty, murderous Dogman? The Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest in northern Georgia comprises 2 U.S. national forests, the Oconee National Forest in eastern Georgia and the Chattahoochee National Forest located in the North Georgia mountains. Now we're talking about over 1,300 square miles of woodland, including mountainous regions. It's a beautiful part of the state, and whether you're an avid outdoorsman or a casual nature lover, it's got everything you could ever want. Hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, boating. Like I said, everything. You see, I'm a writer by trade, and I've been working on a manuscript. An interesting story, at least I thought so, about the back and forth espionage that was going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Bay of Pigs operation, and also the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anyway, I'd seen something online about visiting upstate in the national forest areas. They had nice cabins for rent, and I could spend 4 or 5 days enjoying the area and do some writing in a peaceful, relaxed atmosphere. So I went to one of the websites and booked a cabin for 5 days. It was a Wednesday, so I figured I could do some trip shopping the next day, get everything organized, and I could head out first thing Friday morning. I ended up getting a couple of steaks, of course, bacon and eggs, a package of brats, and the obligatory pack of chicken wings. I also made sure to pick up a bottle of Hennessy and a bottle of Crown Royal, perfect for chilled mountain evenings, all capped off with a box of hand-rolled Dominican cigars. Well, Friday morning came and I loaded everything into the car, cooler and all. I stopped to get some coffee, and 5 minutes later I was cruising north on Interstate 75. Now, from everything I've told you so far, you're probably thinking that everything was set up for a great retreat up in the North Georgia mountains, a wondrous excursion into the heart of one of our great national forests. Well, I'll tell you this. That great, enjoyable writing nature retreat turned into a hellish experience and was without a doubt the most frightening experience of my life. It all started my second night there. Strange howling just as the sun began to set. It seemed a little strange, but I can't say that I thought too much about it. I lit a cigar, refreshed my drink, opened my laptop, started some jazz on Pandora, and started banging out a few lines. Things all changed just a few minutes later when I started hearing weird noises outside. It was like the sounds of scratching, scurrying, and rustling in the brush and undergrowth all around the cabin. So now, with the howling and then the other sounds, I really started wondering and worrying about what the fuck was going on out there. And it didn't stop either. In fact, it amped up to bumps and poundings on the walls of the cabin. It was as if something was going all around the cabin outside and trying to figure out a way in, or at least terrorize the shit out of me. Then it was at the door. At first, just scratching, which after about 30 seconds it turned into a full-scale pounding. You can imagine at this point, I was in full bust-out panic. What the fuck was this thing? The pounding got to the point where I could hear the wood start to crack. I kept thinking, how in the hell did I end up in some shit like this? Trapped in a damn cabin with some kind of fucking monster trying to knock the door down. The only thing I could think to do was to try to brace myself up against the door and hope that whatever this thing was would give up. That was a dumbass move. The thing let out a sinister growl and leveled 2 insane pounds on the door, and 2 things happened. First, the force threw me back and down flat on my ass. Second, the door split open halfway down the middle. That's when I finally saw it. It looked like a gigantic wolf with jet black fur and the biggest goddamn head you can imagine. It growled and snarled, showing its big-ass sharp teeth. So I'm there picking myself up off the floor, watching this wolf thing try to force its way in and rip my guts out. Then, as if the shit could get any crazier, I heard gunshots. Somebody was out there firing at the wolf thing. I could even hear the creature being struck, and it would jerk from the impact of the bullets. The creature snarled again, then backed itself away and took off with insane speed. There were a few more gunshots as the creature dashed away into the forest. I was greeted at what was left of the cabin door by 2 men in ranger uniforms. I saw the Forestry Service logo patch on their jackets. They identified themselves and asked if I was injured. I told them that aside from having a sore ass and being scared shitless, I was okay. I asked them what the hell that thing was, and I was surprised at the level of information they were willing to share. They said it was a thing called a Dogman, and that every year they were known to come down out of the highest, most isolated parts of the mountains hunting deer. This, according to the Rangers, was the first case of one of these things trying to break into a building and come after a person. The Rangers asked how long I planned to stay, and I told them just as long as it took me to pack up my shit load the car, and get the hell down the highway. They were very subtle in suggesting that I didn't make too much out of what had happened. I wondered later if that meant that they knew I was a writer and had some concern about what I might put out there for the public. Well, fuck that. I'm sharing my story with you because everyone needs to know that these things are real and they're deadly. Trust me, I looked right into the eyes of one that wanted to kill me. I was lucky. I live to tell the tale of what happens when there's a wolf at the door. I wanted to share an experience that I had in relation to the many Dogman encounters that I've heard about on Blackwater media. I thought it was important to put this out for the many people that perhaps never heard of this creature, or even for those who can't perceive that such things could even exist. The incident took place on the Sunday of the 2020 Memorial Day weekend during a barbecue that I was hosting for a few close friends. Without being too specific about the location of my home, I'll just say that I live about an hour and a half north of Atlanta, in some proximity to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Now let me set up the scene, circumstances, and situation for you. I have a deck out back, and the backyard itself is nice size and borders a wood line with about 15 to 20 acres of forest stretching out to the north-northwest. The deck itself is elevated, of course, maybe about 18 to 20 inches, and going down 3 steps puts you right at ground level. Over the last several years, I've had people over on holidays and weekends on a fairly regular basis, and these get-togethers would normally go on in the nighttime hours, so I had a couple of floodlights installed around the deck as well as a pair of motion sensor lights on 12-foot posts out close to the wood line. Now on that Saturday, I'd gone shopping. I'd already decided to keep it relatively simple. You know what I mean? Burgers and brats with potato salad as a side. I'd wait till the 4th of July to pull out all the stops. But I did buy some Canadian Club and Crown Royal to set everything off just right. So Sunday turned out to be a nice day with just a few high clouds. I got the music cranked up and got all of the meat on the grill by about 3 o'clock. My friends started arriving a little after 4 and everyone made themselves a drink. With the food just about ready, the sounds of the music, conversation, and laughter began to fill the air. Of course, as did the aroma of cigars. Afternoon turned into evening, and as darkness began to creep in, I happened to take notice of some kind of movement, at least I thought it was movement, across the yard and maybe 10 to 20 yards into the wood line. I wasn't certain, mind you, but it was just the impression of something moving back and forth in the brush and brambles. To be honest, I didn't think much of it at the time because it wasn't unusual at all to see a deer or the occasional fox or bobcat snooping around the forest edge. I didn't say anything to any of my friends at that point, but I'm pretty sure that some of them noticed my regular glances out across the yard. Then everything changed. It was dark now, and those glimpses of movement quickly turned into a rush of sounds and movement that started to catch everyone's attention. Then the motion sensor pole lights jumped on. Everyone was up on their feet now, with all eyes now zeroing in on the impossibly monstrous figure, now illuminated by the light, standing just beyond the fence. I could hear my friends muttering in hushed tones. What the fuck? What the hell is that? Holy shit. What we saw was a gigantic wolf-like creature standing there. Now, knowing the exact height of the lamp poles, this thing was clearly 7 to 8 feet tall, dark fur, and huge German Shepherd type ears. We could even see its huge chest moving in and out in a huffing-like breathing motion. The creature took a step forward and placed its hands on the top of the fence. Now, this thing had two giant clawed hands instead of paws, which is what you would expect, right? It took 2 or 3 side steps to the right, and as it did, we could see it adjust its grip on the fence. And we could also hear a low mumbling growl. Then the wolf thing let out a horrifying growl, and as it did, it motioned its head forward as if it were trying to project its fury at us. Just as the wave of that terrifying roar began to dissipate, the creature turned and dashed back into the woods with insane speed. Now, you might think that after that, everyone would have been scrambling to get to their cars to get the hell out of there, but that's not what happened. There was a few minutes of silence and head shaking. But then, everyone refreshed their drinks, sat back down, and we talked about what happened for another couple of hours. We talked about how this proved that all kinds of weird and bizarre things must exist and are around us all the time. That led to the sharing of UFO sightings, ghost stories, and just about everything in between. I think that my circle of friends grew tighter and closer that night. And despite the fact that the whole experience scared us all shitless, out of that abject fear came something higher, something greater.
Here in this primitive river bottom wilderness in southern Arkansas, along with deer, duck, crane, and beaver, lurks a creature that walks upright. Whether it is a man, a monster, or a myth, no one really knows. What we do know is the people around Fouke, Arkansas say they have seen such a creature nearly 250 times since 1954. And that this creature, whatever it is, emits one of the most terrifying sounds ever recorded. Legend of Boggy Creek, rated G.
My Dogman encounter goes back to the early 80s on a trip down to the Snake River, which was about 5 miles from the town we lived in. This was in eastern Oregon. Lots of sagebrush and hills. It was at the beginning of winter, so there was only a slight amount of snow on the ground. It was going to be a full moon that night, and we knew it would be a spectacular view of the river. Me, my wife Liz, my sister Ann, and her boyfriend Pete were in our 1968 Mustang and totally into the groove. We got some Knob Creek, and I had a bundle of cigars. We were just going to relax and enjoy the night. It was about 11 o'clock when we headed out. The The place we were going was a recreation area where people could camp, launch their boats, and so forth. To get into the place, you have to leave the main road. Dirt and gravel dipped down toward the boat docks and then made a loop onto the upper portion of the parking area. So everything was going well. The moon lit things up enough that you could make out shapes around you. We just parked the car and were talking. My wife lit her cigarette. We were in the front seats. Ann and Pete were in the back. Just as I was getting ready to light up a cigar, I saw something moving out in front of the car, maybe 20 yards out. My first thought was maybe that it was a deer. I turned to offer Pete a cigar and saw it moving to the right of the car. My sister knew something was up right away. She was about to ask what was wrong when she saw this thing moving toward the back of the car. We both said, "What's that?" The guys asked what, and we said, "Something's out there." They started to laugh, but then they saw it moving around to the left of the car. At that point, I got goosebumps all over my body, and I had a very bad feeling about the situation. This thing moved around to the front of the car again, but I noticed it was closer than before. At that point, I was getting worried about what was going on. In fact, I was getting spooked. Of course, the guys wanted to know what it was. This thing had circled the car once more, and when it got in front again, I hit the headlights. Nothing. What the hell? It'd been right there just a second before. God damn it. When I turned on the headlights, it was on the right side of the car again, much closer than before. We just couldn't tell what it was at that point. By this time, my sister was freaking out, and so was I. Everyone started yelling at me to get us the fuck out of there. I was creeped out enough by that point too, so I started the car, slammed into reverse, and spun out of there backwards, heading for the loop so that we could get back to the main road. Now, we thought we were in the clear, but just then the scariest thing I've ever experienced up until that time in my life happened. As we began to climb out of the edge of the headlights, but in plain view, a creature appeared. It was an incredibly large wolf. It stood upright like a person, but was skinny and covered with a long kind of silvery brown hair. It turned when the headlights hit it, and we were so close to this goddamn thing we could see lots of detail. The thing looked directly into my eyes, and I swear it was giving me a good once-over, as if to memorize my face or something. Its eyes had dark pupils, and the look in them was like looking at a madman. Pure evil and insanity seemed to be the only thing in them. As soon as this happened, which couldn't have been more than a few seconds, I hit the fucking gas and was aiming right for it. I was going to take this motherfucker out. Then it moved so fast, it was almost a blur, and it was gone. How it even got caught in our headlights, I don't know. All I know is that we tore ass out of there as fast as we could. We were out in what was essentially the middle of nowhere. No homes, no businesses, no nothing. Now the truth is, we didn't know what we were looking at. We didn't know what we'd seen. But the only thing that came to mind was werewolf. Later on, I saw that Stephen King werewolf movie, Silver Bullet, and the thing we saw looked almost exactly like the werewolf in the film. Also, since that time, a shitload of other really creepy things have happened out in that area. UFO sightings, and sightings of other weird humanoid type beings. I'll never go there again. Of course, the thing we saw that night is what today everybody calls Dogman. You know, a few years ago, I did a sketch of the creature lurking along a dark roadside. And my wife jokingly suggested that I add a road sign to the drawing, and that the sign should read, "Dogman, dead ahead." One evening I was driving from my house to the local Walmart. I drove around a bend that was maybe 2/10 of a mile from my house. I was driving slowly because people will fly through that road from a connecting lane and get into accidents. It was overcast, but not dark yet. I glanced to the side of the road. I always scanned the area because random things kept getting dumped there and occasionally discarded pets there would need to be rescued. I was only about 6 or 7 feet away from what I saw. At first I thought, oh, a fox, but then immediately recalculated due to the size, almost like my brain was trying to figure out what I was looking at, and then thought, werewolf. It was lying on its side and sort of propping itself up. I got a very good look at it as I stopped the car and stared. It was dark brown, close to black, and had canid facial features and was covered in fur, but the proportions were like a human. This thing was at least 7 feet tall, and I'm thinking now maybe more. It made eye contact with me, and I swear to God it looked like it was grinning at me. Its jaw opened and I saw sharp incisors and rows of sharp teeth. I was close enough that I could see the muscle movement in its face and jaw when it did that. At that point, I started the car and thought to myself, that's not human. It kept eye contact with me as I drove around the bend until it was out of view. It was almost as if it was saying, I know you see me. I see you too. It didn't seem aggressive or angry, almost like it was amused. Now, my coping mechanism for what I call crazy shit, because that's what this was, is to go emotionally numb and like a robot focus on the immediate task. So that night I kept driving and got the items I needed from the store, almost like I was in low-level shock. When I drove back, the creature wasn't there anymore. When I got back home, I had a stiff drink, and then I had another. So this thing that is generally known as Dogman is real. I've read a lot of commentary about this creature on social media, and I noticed that some people love to inject mystical mumbo-jumbo into everything. Stop trying to explain it with magic. Stop trying to make it fit into whatever religion you're part of. Something tells me the Dogman doesn't give a shit about holy water, salt sprinkling, or sage. It's a monster. A flesh and blood terror with fur, claws, and fangs. To be honest, it still gives me nightmares. Sharing this story is a kind of therapy for me. I rarely go anywhere after dark now. After all, the dark is exactly where all the monsters live. I stamped down the underbrush with my boot. The dry leaves and dead plants snap sharply like firecrackers. The moon, full, shines through the overhanging branches of the trees. Notes of the silvery light shone like pillars of silvery mist stretching into the sky. The trees, now dark and foreboding in the night, loom over as if looking down on me. My footsteps seem explosive in the dead silence, unbroken except by the sound of small creatures dashing through the grass. I feel as if I'm being watched by the shadows themselves. The sensation seems to increase, like a gentle pressure at the back of my head. I quickly whirl around to face nothing, only the dark trees and darker shadows. I think I see a moving figure. In the swirling darkness, something is there, seeming to be cloaked in the very dark of night. I hesitate, wondering if it's paranoia from my fear-filled mind or an evil figure darker than night itself. The fear takes over, overloading my senses and controlling my limbs. I run, my feet flying below me as if they were not my own. I fly over the terrain. The world blurs, and all that seems real are my burning lungs and endless stride, my body fueled by sharp stabs of fear. My heart pounds against my chest so loud I can hear it thumping in my ears. The shadow that is following me is gaining, its hulking form blotting out the shafts of moonlight, the air filled with sounds of its hoarse breathing. The tremors of my footfalls jolt up my frantic legs, my breath expelling in clouds of whispery smoke in the cold night air. My boot catches on an upturned root and I fall, my body twisting below me. I call out as I fall because I know that it's all over. The monster gives a triumphant howl that echoes through the dark forest. What a fool I was to think that I would survive a night in Werewolf Forest, to think the stories were just stories. The ragged wisps of gray clouds that had obscured the round moon now pull back like drawn curtains, and I see my pursuer. A hulking monstrous form, neither man nor beast, but a horrible combination of both. Its horrible long teeth glisten with saliva, and in place of hands, dark paws with ugly claws like black daggers. It howls once more into the blackness. I try to move, run, hide, but my body feels paralyzed with fear. I can only scream and watch. The monster's head is silhouetted in front of the glow of the moon before it plunges down onto my prone body. Its teeth sink into my shoulder and the pain races through my body like a shock wave of icy spikes. I gasp as its fangs withdraw from my flesh, and the last thing I see is the form disappearing into the darkness. My eyes flutter open to a strange scene. I'm lying on a soft bed, clean so I can smell the detergent. My mind wanders back to the strange dream I had, but when I glance over, I see my shoulder wrapped in thick gauze, and my fears are confirmed. It was no dream. The light is blinding, and my senses are hyper-aware of everything. The smells of soap and antibacterial cleaning solutions. I hear the buzzing of incandescent lights and people walking down halls and the sound of people talking. I hear and smell the young nurse long before she enters, accompanied by an older man with graying hair and a stethoscope around his neck. The first words out of my mouth are, "Where am I?" The doctor provides me with the answer. Someone who didn't give his name or address had brought me in from Werewolf Forest, where I'd been for 2 days. The doctor dabbed some horrible smelling antibacterial chemicals that stung both my shoulder and my super-sensitive nose. And the next day I was let go. That was a month ago. Now I stand in Werewolf Forest with the dark trees looming overhead and the full moon rays illuminating both the ragged clouds that cover it and the darkening sky. The forest is new to my hyperactive senses. I can hear and smell every animal, identify every bird chirp. The clouds slide dramatically away from the bright moon they cover, and the rays fall upon my face. My heart pounds, and I feel a shiver of anticipation flash through my body. My human hands, so soft and fleshy, become clawed paws. Black pads replace my palms. I feel my small rounded ears become pointed at the top of my head. I kick off my shoes and watch, astonished as my feet become furred paws. My jaw pushes out, lengthening into a wolfish muzzle, my nose becoming leathery and wet. What a goddamn rush! Nothing could compare to the pure adrenaline sensation I feel energizing my whole body, sending more shivers through my changing limbs. My entire body is covered by a rippling of fur, and I feel my spine lengthening at its base, a wolf tail ripping through my clothes. I feel alive, like I'd never before. I've never truly lived until this rebirth. I run, truly feeling what it is to be alive. Feel the world whipping by my heart, beating in pure exhilaration. If this be Satan's curse, I welcome it. I am the werewolf of Werewolf Forest. The power was passed by the werewolf that had bitten me so long ago. I howl my song of pure bliss to the moon, and I am free. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. My name is Mike. I'm 63 years old, recently retired from a soul-sucking IT analyst job for a major bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was just a cog in a big money machine that facilitated the movement of money across the globe. East to west, you can call it dollars, euros, yen, or rupees, it's all the same. Money flows like a river. It has currents and eddies, up and down, diverted to and fro, damned and damned. You see trillions of monetary units flowing across the world and wonder what it might be like if only a small percentage of it were diverted to help people out. Maybe we could stamp out war, feed the hungry, healthcare for all that need it. But that's not the game I had to leave behind. I'm not here to comment on the vagaries of modern society. I'll leave all that to the poets, priests, and politicians who are paid for their words and for their lies. So, I retired to the country, not off the grid, but close enough to see the edge, close enough that I can see the footsteps of those that came before, the early pioneers and settlers, the wagon tracks and homesteads of a long-dead chapter in early America, a time of exploration and discovery, and a time when one man was deemed only a percentage of what makes up another man, by law. A time where cotton and tobacco were the currency of the world, and they truly flowed on rivers after being harvested on the backs of slaves. I have a best friend who's named Galen. We love to explore the remnants of this bygone era before the march of modern society wipes them out forever. Luckily, I live in the largest and least populated county in Virginia, so there are many abandoned homesteads and graveyards from the late 1700s through to the Civil War and the subsequent migration out of the war-torn South. Galen always has her voice recorder and camera at the ready. I usually man the video camera. She's gotten many EVPs and filmed countless orbs and ghostly manifestations. She truly puts those stupid ghost hunter shows on TV to shame. In our investigations, her one rule is to run if she says run, no questions. A rule that I obey maybe 75% of the time. About 10 miles from my house, up on a hill, sits a large mid-1800s mansion made inaccessible by a lack of a driveway and a tangled thicket of brush and briars. There were even vultures nesting on the chimney. Talk about spooky. Of course, Galen was itching to investigate. I would always make up an excuse not to go up there. It was too cold, too wet, too damn scary. But where most men would fear to tread, Galen goes, "Come on!" And she says it gleefully, which makes it that much more unnerving. So, giving in to the inevitable, we go out there to investigate. We parked my truck below the house about 50 yards away. It was a beautiful autumn day in the Appalachians, so I couldn't weasel my way out of it this time, and I had to admit I was curious as hell to see what was there. With the smell of sassafras and chimney smoke in the air, we started to make our way through the brush and trees. I was struck by the debris all around. I found a rusted-out machete, water bottles, and even an old smashed-up video camera. But the shoes, tennis shoes, and old moss-covered boots littered the ground. We finally hacked our way up to the front porch. It was magnificent in its decay, the ornate banisters and eaves crafted in a day where craftsmanship ruled and deadlines were an afterthought. The inside was bone dry for the most part. There were a lot of artifacts and clothing from previous tenants, and more shoes. There was even a TV from the 60s in one of the rooms, which seems to be the last time the house was occupied. We proceeded to explore the mansion room to room. We separated, Galen with her voice recorder and camera, and me with the video camera. I went out back and found an old well with cement all around it. I looked over the edge down into the well as best I could, and I thought I saw a pair of golden eyes, but it was hard to see, so I adjusted the viewer on the camera and held my hand over the hole. In the viewer, I could clearly see a pair of dark golden eyes glowing in the darkness of the hole. I was just about to cry out to Galen when I heard her shout, "Mike, get up here, quick!" She was at the back of the house in what looked like the kitchen. Off to the side was another leaf and debris-covered room with a hatch door in the middle. It looked to be the door to a root cellar, so we made our way to the door. It reeked with the stench of death in the room, and it got stronger closer to the doorway, and there was what looked to be blood leading up to and down the steps. Galen went, "Look!" At the bottom of the steps was the carcass of a huge deer lying partially in the dim light of the small amount of sun that made its way in, and partially in the darkness of the root cellar. Now, I was kind of relieved, and I thought to myself, well, that explains the blood and the stench of death. I was just beginning to tell her I'm not going down there when the carcass suddenly and quickly was dragged out of the light into the dark. Now, I have to admit, one of us screamed, and I'm pretty sure it was me. Galen didn't have to yell run this time because we both bolted out of the room towards the front door. I let her go out first, down the steps into the brush. If we were to be eaten, best it was me first, but I had the keys to the goddamn truck. The things you think of when you're about to be killed. I got about 20 feet into the brush and looked back, and what I saw shook me to the core. In the darkness of the doorway, I saw two eyes glowing like brake lights of a semi-truck at night. I froze in my tracks. I was able to make out a dark shape in the darkness of the doorway. It looked like a huge dog or wolf, jet black with huge pointed ears on the top of its head. It was then that the eyes went into a malevolent squint, and then the motherfucker smiled at me. I could see the pure white teeth, the canines on either side, and the front teeth weren't rounded out like a dog's but went straight across. It had a flat, puggy snout, and I could see its nostrils flare as it lifted its head as if to get my scent. It then lowered its head and laser-eyed into mine, down to my soul. Its eyes were glowing so red that I innately felt that it had me, that I was his for the taking. I couldn't move, and I dropped to my knees hanging onto a tree. Right about that time, Galen yelled, "Mike!" with a hint of exasperation. The sound of her voice broke the hold it had on me, and I bolted, pressing the door lock remote of my key fob so Galen could get into the truck, and I got in too. Fired the ignition, dropped it in gear, and spun a rooster tail of dirt and gravel 20 feet into the air. "What the hell was that?" Galen said. "I don't know. Not sure myself what I've just seen. Maybe it's a bobcat?" "You're probably right," I replied, relieved in the fact that she'd not seen what I had. I was relieved that she hadn't looked into the eyes of this devil as I had, that the thing didn't know who she was, that she wasn't on his list as I seemed to be. Then Galen asked me, "Do you think you could go back sometime and get that TV for me?" I looked back in my rearview mirror at the house fading in the distance, with vultures flying about wondering what happened to their meal, and said, "We'll see," knowing full goddamn well I'd never go back there, not even travel on that road again. That was in the fall of 2016. Galen has since moved an hour away due to life, and so we don't get out as often. But all through the winter of 2016 into 2017, my encounter was in the back of my mind. Would that thing hunt me down? Was he scoping me out, waiting for the right time to strike? I live in a single-wide trailer next to a lake with my two rescue cats, Little Boy and Adam. I let them out at daybreak and bring them in at night. Little Boy likes to get up on the roof, as do a family of raccoons. Sometimes at night the raccoons will run across my roof, freaking me out. I hope it's the raccoons anyway. There have been a couple of times I've smelled the stench. It's the country and things do die out in the woods. But I don't go off my back porch at night. Later on in that spring of 2017, probably late May, I was driving in the country on Grays Bridge Road along the Pig River. It's a gravel road, and I decided to park and get out and look at the fish sunning themselves in the primeval-looking shallows of the swampy S-curves of the Pig. It was then that I thought I heard a baby cry. I heard it again, and it sounded like a demonic baby's cry, but I had to check it out. I have to admit that I was scared when I made my way to the sound. I drew my pistol. It's a Taurus Judge that shoots either 5 .45 caliber Colt cartridges or 410 shot. I usually keep it loaded with 4 shot and 1 bullet. I made my way through the scrub and what I saw was heartbreaking. It was a dead mountain lion with its cub lying beside her body. I walked over to the scrawny cub and it growled at me pitifully and tried to run, but it collapsed after only a few feet. The mother was ripped to shreds. Whatever had done this to them, she had fought mightily. About 10 feet over was an even sadder sight. It was another cub with its midsection completely eaten out up to the spine. I assumed this was the brother to what I later found out was his sister cub. She was missing an ear. Her eye was closed and covered in dried blood. I went back to my truck and got a Dollar General basket and jean jacket I had in the back. I put my arms into the jacket and I used it to lift her up and put her in the basket. She didn't fight, resigned to her fate. I kept telling her, "You'll be fine, baby girl." When I brought her home, my cats freaked out. Adam went running to the back, but little boy was right there, curious as usual. She was bigger than them, but in such a bad way that she was no threat. I got a warm cloth and cleaned her eye. It opened and she'd not lost it as she'd lost her ear. She had 4 horizontal gashes on either side of her flanks. They weren't too deep and had scabbed up. I had some feline antibiotics, so I filled the syringe and squirted some into her mouth. The weird part was that she never fought me. I found that odd. I fixed up some warm milk and filled the syringe and she drank that eagerly. I fixed up a box with some towels and put her in the back room. Little boy, who has more empathy than most people, insisted on staying by the box. Adam, on the other hand, could give a shit. I ended up cutting out one side of the box so she could come and go. Little boy would curl up with her. I went ahead and named her Jet because the gashes had healed, but the scars made her look aerodynamic and fast. She soon started eating Fancy Feast by the box. I ended up getting Alpo dog food that she ate heartily. I knew I should have called animal control, but I was afraid they'd put her down with the shape she was in. After about a week, she was up and about, little boy by her side. It was as if she had adopted him as her own brother. They would roll and play fight, and I could even pet her, but there was a look in her eyes, a lack of joy, as if she were on a mission. I wish I could say that she became my pet, that we were a family, but after about 4 weeks, she was playing with little boy in the front yard, and then she just disappeared. I knew it was inevitable that she would have to leave. She had a mission of revenge. Somehow I knew this to be true. And I, for one, hoped that she would succeed. It was 1995 and I just graduated high school. I started hanging out with an old friend that I hadn't seen for years. And one day we just decided, hey, let's go to New Orleans. And we did. We had $140 between us, and back then that was more than enough. We made it to New Orleans and almost died from culture shock, turned around and headed to Magnolia, Mississippi to get some sleep. We stayed at Magnolia Inn. Now, it was a real shithole, but it was nice and cool. It was May or June, and in southern Mississippi, cool was the only adjective that mattered. We stayed up that night playing poker, drinking Gordon's vodka, and talking about who knows what, probably girls, college, and girls again. At some point I said, hey, ever been to Texas? He said no. Well, shit, pack your bag and let's roll. We had a road atlas, and Marshall, Texas was right across the border from Shreveport. Now keep in mind, this was really before the days of widespread cell phone use and nothing like GPS. Anyway, we arrived in Shreveport, made a phone call to another friend who we were actually supposed to be staying with. Now, both of our mothers had called looking for us. The only person that knew where we were was the buddy on the phone. It was no big deal. We'd be home in a day or two. Now, I'm going to be a little bit short on details because if I don't, this will turn into a novel-length story about chasing armadillos and being, well, shit, chased by the boogeyman. Before we left that rest area in Shreveport, where we made the call, we actually saw an armadillo. Now let me tell you something about these damn things. Those bastards will hiss, jump, and turn into Tasmanian devils if you corner them. They also carry nasty shit like rabies and everything else, probably leprosy. When we were 18, we chased our armadillo around for an hour. Now let me tell you about Shreveport. I don't know how it is now, but that summer, it looked and smelled like a place where oil and metal went to die. It was dirty. It was the worst. We crossed the bridge and saw people fishing about 100 yards from where a drainage pipe from a factory was spewing forth waste upriver from the fishermen. The locals reminded me of the locals in Adamsville. Bald-headed women, cross-eyed men, a lot of bald-headed, cross-eyed kids. It was like a damn Rob Zombie movie come to life. Shit, I felt like a movie star because I had a full head of hair and could see straight. But Marshall, Texas was 40 miles away, so we rolled on. Marshall was a decent little town, home of the Fire Ant Festival. Can you believe that shit? We stopped at a little barbecue joint and had a Coke and some pulled pork. It was getting late and the sun was setting. We looked at the map and decided to backtrack a bit and head up rural Route 43 through Karnak and past Caddo Lake. We would eventually run into Highway 59, head to Texarkana, and then headed back home. When we left the barbecue joint and headed towards 43, it was dusk. Highway 43 wasn't well lit. It was almost as dark as Natchez Trace Parkway. I've got a good story to tell about using a pair of pantyhose as a fan belt for an old diesel Mercedes. Don't ever get stuck on the trace after dark. Ever. Anyway, my friend was driving and we were doing about 45 miles per hour. Any faster would have been reckless even for a couple of 18-year-old dumbasses, and I had no intentions of getting mixed up with a bunch of redneck cops down here in Texarkana. So like I said, the highway was dark and winding. There were lots of hills that ended in curves. There were beady and glowing eyes on both sides of the road. But I knew that these were just the critters that came out at night. Raccoons, foxes, coyotes, things like that. You could hear the crickets and the bullfrogs over the sound of the wind rushing by that old Sentra. It was peaceful and creepy at the same time. And that humidity was a real thing, tangible. The air was thick. It smelled like pastures, hay, and swamp. We drove for what seemed like hours, and it was after midnight, and I saw a sign that informed me that Bivens was the next town of any size. I was hypnotized by the yellow lines on the road. We hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. And I started getting sleepy, so I rolled the window down and lit a cigarette. There was music coming from the radio, or maybe it was the cassette player. I think it was something by CCR. I smoked my cigarette, absent-mindedly flicking ashes out of the window. I took one last puff and flicked the still-burning Camel short off into the woods. And then I saw it. I never looked to my right. I didn't even kind of peek to the right. Maybe I did a little when I flicked the cigarette away, I don't know. What I do know is that in my periphery there was something running alongside the car. It was just behind my window, behind where the edge of the door ends and before where the back window begins. I looked over the speedometer and it said 40 miles per hour. I looked at my friend and he was looking straight ahead, so I looked straight ahead. I could see it. I could see one huge arm, matted hair, reddish brown, sticky looking, and primal. I eased my right hand over and rolled up my window. My friend was still looking straight ahead. His jaw was clenched, and he put both hands on the wheel and sped up. Neither one of us said anything. I looked straight ahead, and still out of my periphery I could see that arm moving, muscles and tendons visibly rippling beneath that matted hair. As the car gained a little speed, the thing running alongside us lost pace slightly. And then I saw the hand on the end of that nightmarish arm. The hand was clenched into the fist the size of a cantaloupe, and I mean a big goddamn cantaloupe. It was covered with the same hair but slightly darker around the fingers, like it was stained with something. Suddenly the hand unclenched and then I saw the claws. Black as the damn Texas midnight. Those claws were at least 2 inches long, sharp like an animal's. And it wasn't a hand so much as it was the killing paw and claws of some beast whose only purpose was to kill and eat. I looked back at my friend. I looked at the speedometer again. 50 miles an hour. I looked straight ahead. It was still there. Shit, I lit another cigarette, then rolled down the window and simply said, "God damn." For some reason, the music had stopped. I finally broke the silence and said, "Hey, do you..." And before I could finish, my friend said, "I see it. I've been seeing it. I can't even see you, but I can see whatever the hell that shit is. How much do you see?" And I said, "More than I want to." So I said, "Speed up, man. Just speed up. It can't keep up forever." I looked over. 55 miles per hour. Whatever was chasing us was thankfully starting to lag behind. I finally worked up the guts to look over to my right, just a bit, imagining the scary part of the movie where you put your hands in front of your face but still peek through. Now, I'm 37 years old and I have 2 regrets. One I have to keep to myself, and the other is me looking to my right that night. This beast was huge. Its chest was above the top of the car, and all I could see was that matted, reddish-brown hair. Then it bent forward as it ran. And I mean, this motherfucker was leaned in and moving hard. When I saw the face of this thing, all reality stopped. We were no longer driving down some country road in Texas. We were now trying to escape from the depths of a monster-inhabited hell. Now, this thing's face is almost beyond my power to describe, but I have to try. I have to try. I can tell you it was evil. The eyes were black and the pupils were amber orange. It flashed its teeth at me in a snarl, yellow and huge. Saliva dripped from its mouth. It opened its eyes wide and looked hungry and pissed off. Then, it opened its mouth. The skin pulled back until all you could see were those black gums and yellow teeth. Immediately, I could feel the car accelerate. "Fucking hell, man, just go." I prayed, I cursed, I lit another cigarette. Then, like sunshine breaking through the clouds, the road straightened out. I said 3 words to my friend. "Don't slow down." We drove through Bivens and we drove to Texarkana. Then we drove home. We never said a word. It was years later, 11 to be exact, before we ever even talked about it again with each other. And even then, we didn't talk about it much. He said he'd never told anyone. And I told him I mentioned it briefly a couple of times. I told the story a few years back for the first time to my girlfriend. The only other time was about a year ago when I told it to a couple of kids who wanted to hear a scary story while they sat around a campfire. They didn't sleep for a day or two, but they asked me a dozen more times to tell them the story. I never told anyone until now that I actually saw the creature's face. Look, I've been scared exactly 2 times in my life. One was on that road, and once was looking at a grizzly bear in front of me with a terminal velocity inducing drop to the side of me. Call it what you will. Call it bullshit if you want. But look me in the eyes and let me tell you this story and you'll know. Never doubt that there are things in this world that defy explanation and logic. Monsters are real. Years after this incident happened, I happened to run across a story in a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. You know, the one about the Fouke, Arkansas monster? It isn't that far from Bivens, Texas, as the crow flies. You ought to invite me over sometime. Offer me a drink. Sit on the porch with me, and I'll tell you the story over a pack of Marlboros and whiskey. And then we'll see how many nights you can go without sleeping. My name is Owen. I've recently shared some information and relayed experiences that I've had concerning the subject of vampires. I've tried and continue to try as best I can to convey the reality and nature of such things which still plague the world of men. And yet, there are still other horrors, other creatures spawned by demonic powers that yet exist in this world, and like the vampire, have been considered by most to be little more than fanciful or frightful elements of fiction and folklore. I speak now of another creature which, like the vampire, is a pariah even among the demonic. A creature which also can be traced back to the dawn of civilization. An evil, ravenous fiend, a thing of darkness, of shadow, of nightmares, and of God-forsaken reality. I speak to you about the lycanthrope, the werewolf. Now, if that word conjures up images and ideas that have been prevalent in film and television for the last 10 or 15 years, forget it. Just more Hollywood horse shit. In fact, these Hollywood renditions more closely resemble the non-terrestrial thing that is now popularly referred to as the Dogman than an actual werewolf. But the issue of Dogman will have to wait. Like the vampire, contemporary media depictions of werewolves tend to attribute this syndrome to some rare, bizarre viral strain. Again, the attempt here is to make the inexplicable explainable by some reach of scientific understanding. Now, I know of a few cases, including the first in my experience in the state of Montana in 1968. And if you go looking in official records, you won't find any trace of what I'm talking about. Just a faint reference to unexplained mutilation murders. What I learned then, and in the years since then, I will share with you. It is, in fact, another manifestation of diabolical powers in our world. Another type of demon possession that goes ignored for the most part by so-called demonologists, occultists, and paranormal experts. In essence, it goes back to the time of Neolithic man when wolf and man competed with one another over predatory dominance. It's exactly this that demonic forces seek to exploit through the process of werewolfery. It is very much a mocking gesture through which evil can twist and distort the body of man into a foul, wicked, hideous form of man's most ancient adversary in the natural world. And so, as long as man has been man, from the fertile plains of Central Africa, the curse of the werewolf has been among us. Once the demonic wolf spirit attaches itself to its victim, the full manifestation takes place on a lunar cycle over a period of a few days each month, usually in conjunction with the rising of the full moon. But the moon doesn't actually cause this transition. You see, demonic spirits are more empowered to come forth when preternatural energies are at their strongest. And inasmuch as the moon gives off no light of its own but merely reflects sunlight, these dark forces feel no fear of the purifying direct rays of the sun and therefore manifest. But what about the transformation? It seems that's really what people want to know about. Well, it's actually more of a distortion than it is a true transformation, but it is monstrous. Wild bristles of hair flood out across the body. Fingernails extend into sharpened claws. The canine teeth push out to sharpened points. The brow pulls back and the ears contort up into a pointed disposition. And a man is now a monster. The werewolf enters the night, lurking in the shadows, dashing across open fields or down forgotten roads, or skulking lightless alleyways. The creature imbued with preternatural energy by the fiendish entity within, which no man could match, and also speed, agility, and reflexes that are such as could only be unnatural. But what about Silver? That's another issue that people always want to know about. The werewolf can be hurt, even injured, temporarily at least, by conventional methods of harm. Unlike the vampire, it is a living creature, but with diabolical regenerative ability. Silver, however, is fatal. But why? You see, silver is a purer metal than bronze and is a stimulator with a more intense energy than gold. Silver utilizes a tetrahedral molecular structure. Silver has a higher vibratory frequency, so it absorbs the most radiated energy. Simply put, the properties of silver prohibit the evil spirit's ability to manifest or even to retain possession. Better still, I would suggest a weapon of silver that has been blessed or otherwise sanctified in any method that would stay the hand of evil. Now, that may shatter the senses of any of you who may hold no regard for higher spiritual realities. And if that's the case, I wish you well and proceed carefully through this life, for you do so at your own peril. Understand this too. If a human life is taken by a werewolf, the life of the possessed is forfeit. From that point on, the destruction of the beast is also the destruction of the man, for the two can only be separated in this process. A silver blade or bullet, although I would scarcely recommend the former, as any hand-to-hand confrontation with this creature would find any man, even a man with prodigious strength, at a great disadvantage. So, take from all of this what you will. Perhaps I will speak more on the issue of lycanthropy, perhaps not. After so many years, I think sometimes it's better to leave it all to the wind and let things exist as they are. But I hope at least now you can understand, or at least begin to understand, why I've always and will continue to regard the existence of werewolves as the devil's curse. Last night I put a bullet into a man's head. I like to say it was right between the eyes, but I was off a little bit to the left. Now, before anybody gets crazy about what I just said, I need to include one mitigating fact. At the instant that I pulled the trigger, the man was in the form of a werewolf. My name is Owen. Twice before I've spoken to you about my work, particularly concerning the subject of vampires. From time to time, however, my exploits diverge off into other areas. Such was the case here. Last night was the culmination of a 6-month investigation that covered the distance of over 1,000 miles. I tracked the creature from town to town, down deserted highways, across rivers, through isolated forests and desolate swamps. There was a brief but volatile confrontation with the thing in the deep bayou region of Louisiana, where stories of the Rougarou persist till this day. Anyway, in the melee I was thrown to the ground and subsequently lost track of the creature, temporarily. If any of you remember, I spoke about vampires, about them being the result of a specific form of demonic possession. The same is true of the lycanthrope. I talked about how the truth about vampires has been twisted and distorted through the popular media. Well, you might not be surprised that the same thing has happened with respect to werewolves. Of course, I should state right here and for the record that yes, they are real. And yes, as I've said previously, the tetrahedral molecular structure of silver makes it deadly to the werewolf. I once spoke of the high vibratory frequency of silver. That specific frequency is 9.71 times 1015 hertz. Just as the radiating rays of sunlight disrupt the vampiric spirit's ability to maintain possession of a non-living body, so too does silver prohibit the emergence of the malevolent wolf spirit. The creature that I destroyed last night had been responsible for 11 deaths. I was brought into the case through the usual off-the-record communiques with high-ranking law enforcement officials. Each of the deaths were classified as mutilation murders, with all the victims having their throats ripped out as with sharp teeth, and severe lacerations randomly inflicted across the bodies. Aside from these factors, the attacks were all carried out during full moon cycles. It wasn't difficult to assess what I was going up against. But it's over now, at least this one particular case. But I do worry about any potential aftermath to what's happened here. I know about the associated deaths in the case, but what about someone who was attacked and survived? Perhaps you remember the legends? Well, this part of it happens to be true. To survive the bite of a werewolf is to have the mark of the beast placed upon you. And then you too will be a victim of the devil's curse.